In the final chapter of my life, I wrote my last collection of essays titled Us. It recounted how Ethan and I met, got to know each other, fell in love, and reflected on the bits of wisdom I had gathered as life neared its end. Everything was calm until Ethan's diary went viral online. I sat in a wheelchair as camera flashes lit up around me, reporters swarming forward to ask my opinion on Ethan's diary. His writings revealed a decades-long, deeply hidden love for Megan, a love so pure it became a mythical tale of devotion. Overnight, my book Us turned into a massive joke. A review cruelly summarized it as the fantasy of a pitiable woman who was never truly loved. Emily, who was pushing my wheelchair, finally managed to squeeze us out of the crowd. Once everyone had left, she stood silently, looking at me with eyes full of pity and guilt. Emily was Megan's child. When Megan's husband passed away, she was at the height of her career. Unable to care for Emily, she was eventually adopted by Ethan and me. I raised her single-handedly. As a child, Emily was often sick and cried non-stop. I spent countless sleepless nights holding and comforting her, pouring all my love into her. After a long silence, Emily finally spoke in a hesitant tone. Aunt Megan wants to return to the country. She wishes to be buried alongside Dad after she passes away. Then, as if trying to soften the blow, she added, Dad endured so much pain in his life. Let this be his final comfort. I didn't respond, only staring at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Emily avoided my gaze. Before leaving, she said, Mom, please think it over carefully. After she left, my caretaker, Sarah, fumed with indignation. Don't listen to her. Ma'am, you and Ethan were together for over 50 years. How could they separate you two in death? What kind of nonsense is that? Ungrateful child. Even strangers understand what's right. But the one you raised as your own doesn't. Megan did return to the country, and her return drew significant attention. The cameras followed her every step, broadcasting her journey live. I watched as she stood in front of Ethan's grave, crying as though her heart would break. The headlines described their love as a world-transcending romance, moving countless viewers to tears. Meanwhile, I had become the punchline of a cruel joke. Megan came to see me. She knelt before me, thanking me for raising Emily and begging for my permission to be buried alongside Ethan. Ethan and I have already lost so much time together. If there's an afterlife, I don't want to lose him again. I didn't respond but turned to Emily. Do you agree? She lowered her head and nodded slightly before quickly adding, Mom, you'll always be my mom. I just have another one now. Emily had always been pragmatic, skilled at weighing pros and cons. Having a celebrated actress as her mother would undoubtedly benefit her career in ways I never could. I knew her well and wasn't surprised by her choice. I was just tired. With difficulty, I finally said, I agree. Let them be buried together. Whether as a final reunion or to fulfill his ancestral wishes. I agreed to it all. After everyone left, I asked Sarah to escort them out. Alone in the silence, I began to reflect on my life. Old age blurs memories, leaving only fragments of the past. I remembered the day Ethan and I chose the name Emily for her. I had asked him about its meaning. He had smiled and said, Life is a long journey. I hope she keeps moving forward with perseverance. In the end, Emily was not just about resilience. It was a reflection of distant love, a longing for the woman in another land who had always occupied his heart. I remember, before we got married, Ethan looked at me with guilt written all over his face and confessed that he couldn't have children. He told me that if I couldn't accept it, we could call everything off. He must have known how much I wanted to have a child of my own. Yet he still lied to me for so many years. I never doubted Ethan's love for me. I always thought he was simply someone who wasn't good at expressing his feelings. A relationship like flowing water, calm and steady, is what lasts, I believed. That was how we managed to stay together for so many years. But the overwhelming love pouring out from his diary showed me otherwise. It wasn't that he was bad at expressing himself. It was just that the person he loved wasn't me. I suppose I should hate him for it. But as I've grown older, even hate has become something I can't muster. All that's left is a faint sorrow that wells up from deep inside, spreading through every corner of my being. All my life, I sought truth. In the foreword of my essays, I wrote, I would rather have clear and certain darkness than see a blurry mirage of light. Yet my entire life has turned out to be one grand illusion. If I could do it all over again. That thought hit me with such force, like the desperate gasp of a drowning person reaching for air. When I woke up, I found myself back on the first anniversary of my marriage to Ethan. He had been working nonstop for weeks, so exhausted that he had fallen asleep on the couch. This version of him was still far from the globally renowned director he would become years later. At the time, he was just a young filmmaker trying to make his way. He had to handle everything himself. The set, the actors, every little detail. I knew how hard he worked, so I never blamed him. Not even when he forgot our anniversary. It wasn't until the sky began to darken that Ethan finally woke up, looking utterly drained. The first thing he said was, "Claire, you don't need to go to the audition for Far Away. Megan's husband just passed away, and she has a child to take care of. This movie is really important to her." Far Away was Ethan's film. When it premiered, it swept every major domestic award. It also launched Megan's career, making her the youngest actress to ever win the Golden Horse Award. After that, she became a sought-after star, with directors clamoring to work with her. This film was Ethan's first step in paving Megan's glittering path to stardom. But Ethan knew how much I had sacrificed for this role. Megan was his adopted sister, and he often said that family should always look out for each other. So, I kept giving in, again and again. But this time, I didn't want to back down. I stopped what I was doing and said, "But this movie is important to me too." He frowned, clearly surprised, and looked at me with a hint of displeasure. "Claire, you'll have plenty of opportunities in the future. Megan's situation is different." I rolled up my sleeves, revealing the bruises on my arms. For this role, I've spent the last 6 months braving the rain and wind, training at the martial arts studio every single day. "Ethan, what makes you think I should just step aside?" For a moment, he looked genuinely shocked. Then he softened, stepping forward to pull me into his arms. "Claire, I know you've suffered for this, but Megan isn't just anyone." "She's not just anyone," I said quietly, pulling away and letting my sleeves fall. "She's the woman you've been thinking about for decades. Isn't she?" His face froze, but I continued, "I'll compete with her fairly. Do you have so little faith in her?" That night, Ethan and I had our first real argument. We parted on bad terms, and I threw myself into the martial arts studio, immersing myself in the character's emotions. Far Away was groundbreaking for its time, one of the first films to tell the story of a woman's journey of growth. It later became one of the most iconic and pioneering works in film history. Its only flaw? The martial arts scenes, which lack strength and impact. I loved this movie. If it were possible, I wanted to make it even better. But I never expected Ethan to stoop so low for Megan. The night before the audition, he spiked my water with sleeping pills and turned off my alarm. Just like that, I missed the audition for Far Away. Without me as competition, Megan easily secured the lead role, as if it had been destined all along. That was how deeply he loved her. A man so upright and admirable in everyone else's eyes was willing to resort to something so despicable for her. It was late by the time Ethan returned home. I looked up at him, my gaze calm and steady. I didn't say a word, just stared at him. This was the husband I had loved for decades, the man I had poured my heart and soul into. There were no hysterics, no uncontrollable anger, just a cold bitterness that settled in the pit of my stomach. Ethan avoided my gaze, his lips trembling as he spoke in a conciliatory tone. "Claire, you'll be the lead in my next film. I know you've been wrong this time. Tell me what you want, and I'll make it up to you." Make it up to me with what? The years of mutual respect and civility that had always felt one-sided? The unwavering loyalty of someone who never knew he didn't deserve it? I continued to look at him, my face devoid of joy or sorrow. He stepped forward, trying to pull me into his arms, but I avoided him and said calmly, "I understand." That night, lying in bed and staring at the white ceiling, all I felt was unwillingness to give in. In my previous life, after missing out on this role, I adopted Emily, which meant sacrificing part of my career. As Emily grew older and started acting, she only ever landed supporting roles. The highest award she ever won was for Best Supporting Actress. My resolve hardened. I wasn't going to give up this time. The next day, I went to see Charles, Ethan's producer. In my previous life, Charles and Ethan were known as a golden duo. Their films couldn't succeed without the other. More importantly, Charles was the heir to the Way family, the largest investor in this film. Sipping his coffee leisurely, Charles smirked. "Mrs. Hayes, I think you're barking up the wrong tree. If someone can't manage their time, they don't deserve a second chance." I looked down, gathering myself, and when I raised my head again, my demeanor had shifted. My voice was low but firm as I recited. "A single pearl, buried for years in a dark cage, now catches the light, illuminating the mountain's bloom." It was a line from the movie, a poem recited by the protagonist, Athena Chu, after a lifetime of struggle. In this moment, I became her, and she became me. With decades of experience behind me, I understood the depth of those emotions more than anyone else. I brushed the foam off my tea and spoke gently. "A pearl like that is worth waiting for, Mr. Way." Charles's expression grew serious as he studied me. Slowly, a smile spread across his face. "Mrs. Hayes, you're far more interesting than that blockhead Ethan." He gave me another chance. After seeing my martial arts performance, he sighed and said, "Where else could I find a star like you, Claire? This role was made for you." A month before filming began, Megan came to visit, bringing her child along. Her purpose was clear. She wanted me to temporarily care for the child. Over the past 6 months, I had grown attached to Emily, and the eventual adoption felt natural. In the kitchen, Ethan was cooking dinner. Ethan rarely cooked, and the few times he did were always when Megan visited. Megan loved his cooking, so he willingly rolled up his sleeves and prepared meals for her. What a grand display of love. I fought to keep my face neutral, suppressing the bitter smile threatening to surface. Instead, I simply observed Megan, a textbook beauty with her delicate features, dressed in mourning black, with a white flower pinned to her hair. She looked the part of a grieving widow. Her pale complexion and slightly drooping brows completed the picture. She sat across from me, holding her crying child, clearly at a loss. Megan had no experience with children and struggled awkwardly, not knowing how to calm him down. I noticed immediately that her hold was wrong. The baby's position was uncomfortable, causing him to cry incessantly. But I didn't move. I just sat on the couch, watching coldly without lifting a finger. It wasn't until Ethan stepped out of the kitchen, taking a moment from cooking, that he rushed to cradle the child in his arms with the utmost care. In my previous life, Ethan adored Megan's child as if he were his own. People used to say they'd never seen such a doting daughter-dad. Sometimes I wondered, if he could love someone else's child this much, what would it have been like if we'd had a child of our own? But now, looking back, it all seems so ironic. He doted on the boy because he saw a resemblance, traces of the person he truly loved. At dinner, Megan kept stealing glances at me, her expression hesitant and unsure. She didn't dare speak, but Ethan, ever attuned to her discomfort, took the lead. "Claire, Megan needs to start filming soon and can't find anyone suitable to care for her child. Could you help out for a few days?" I slowly swallowed my bite, sipped my wine, and responded coolly, "I'm busy." Ethan frowned, his tone sharpening. "Claire, we're all family. Stop being so childish." He always acted as though I should naturally accommodate everything, as if I couldn't possibly have my own matters to attend to, and any refusal on my part was just me throwing a tantrum. I looked up at him, meeting his gaze directly. He hesitated, his expression darkening before asking reluctantly, "Then what's keeping you so busy?" I dabbed at my mouth with a napkin, stood, and replied with deliberate calm, "You'll find out when the time comes. I've had my fill, so I'll leave you two to catch up." I couldn't help but wonder what expressions they'd wear on the first day of shooting, when the truth finally came to light. In the end, Ethan made all the arrangements for Megan. She had nothing to worry about and could focus entirely on her role. The first day of filming dawned gray and rainy, matching the opening scene of Far Away. The overcast skies seemed endless, as if the sun would never rise again. Ethan drove the family car to the set that morning. Though he wasn't late, he arrived to find everyone already assembled. The air buzzed with activity, but something felt off. Despite everyone being present, The ceremony had yet to begin. Lowering my black umbrella, I looked up and locked eyes with Ethan. His brow furrowed as he strode toward me, irritation clear on his face. "Claire, why are you here? It's the first day of filming, and things are hectic. I don't have time for you right now." I brushed his hand aside and walked straight toward Charles. His eyes lit up briefly with surprise, a flicker of admiration that he couldn't quite hide. Today, I was dressed in the protagonist's signature black attire, a look that clearly satisfied him. I curled my lips into a faint smile. Charles clapped his hands, instantly silencing the crowd. "Our lead actress has arrived." Megan whipped her head up, her face full of disbelief. Ethan's brows furrowed tightly as he muttered, "Charles, I know you like to joke, but today isn't the time for games." Charles's smile vanished, his expression turning serious. "I'm not joking." It was only then that Ethan seemed to realize that the situation was beyond his control. He gritted his teeth and said quietly, "Megan was the lead actress we chose together. Since when can we change the lead at the last minute?" Charles's face darkened, his tone growing cold. "Claire is your wife. Don't tell me you didn't realize she was the better choice." He stepped closer to Ethan, clapping him on the shoulder. "Ethan, for a director, art should be your only pursuit, not something to be swayed by trivial emotions." Megan left the ceremony in tears, shooting me a sharp glare as she passed. Ethan started to follow her, but the ceremonial fireworks sounded, rooting him to the spot. In the group photo that followed, Ethan stood in the center, his face stern and somber, while I stood beside him, smiling brightly. My time had finally begun. When filming officially began, the actress originally cast as the secondary lead suddenly fell ill and had to withdraw. Megan was quickly assigned to the role. I couldn't help but marvel at Ethan's dedication to her. He had orchestrated everything so meticulously. By chance, the first scene to be shot was a confrontation between Megan and me. The protagonist and the secondary lead had grown up together, but this scene revealed the secondary lead's betrayal. I stepped forward, trembling, gazing down at her from above with a mixture of heartbreak and disbelief. My voice broke as I said, "Tell me it wasn't you." I advanced slowly, my eyes filled with sorrow and pain, which gradually gave way to cold determination. Then, with a sharp, clean motion, I slapped her. My sword spun with precision, pressing against her neck. In that moment, the protagonist truly wanted to kill her, to avenge her fallen brother. My eyes burned red, brimming with rage and anguish. Megan froze completely, unable to respond. She stood rooted in place, forgetting her lines entirely. The secondary lead was a richly layered character, a child of the streets, once fighting beggars for scraps of food, who ultimately betrayed the protagonist yet sacrificed her life for her in the end. Played well, the character would shine, becoming a highlight of the story. But it was clear Megan couldn't carry the role. Ethan called for a cut and immediately rushed over to check Megan's face, full of concern. His expression was one of pure heartache as he turned to me, dissatisfaction evident in his eyes. Ethan was notorious in the industry for being an exacting director. Actors often had to endure grueling winter shoots, plunging repeatedly into icy water, yet no one dared to complain. Megan, however, was his exception, his only indulgence. He retrieved an ice pack himself, gently pressing it against her face as he spoke in a soft, almost doting tone. "Megan, that was already very good. Let's do one more take." "Okay." I rolled my eyes internally. "Good," I thought. What part of that performance was good? He had the audacity to call that good. Charles couldn't hold back a sarcastic laugh. "Tell me, Ethan, what exactly was good about that? Let's try again." Megan wasn't frozen this time, but her delivery was halting and awkward. "Cut, cut, cut," Ethan called out, visibly distressed. Megan, however, wiped away her tears, her voice trembling but firm as she said, "I can do it." If she put even half the emotion she showed now into her performance, this scene would have passed long ago. By the end, my hand was numb from repeatedly slapping her. Megan's face was swollen, and the look she gave me was full of resentment. Charles, lounging in his chair, didn't even lift an eyelid. "If you could do it, Miss Megan, we wouldn't need to shoot this scene so many times." You might not be tired, but everyone else is. The crew, full of overworked professionals, had little patience for Megan's endless attempts to perfect her dedicated act. Charles, losing interest, left to negotiate investments out of town, unwilling to waste more time waiting for her to get the scene right. Over the next few days, Ethan painstakingly coached Megan through her performance. Scene by scene, filming finally progressed at a passable pace. Then came the protagonist's first major highlight, the iconic scene where she willingly enters the fray, wielding a long spear. One of the most celebrated moments in film history. I had spent weeks preparing for this scene, practicing every day with the stunt coordinator. But Ethan's final cut of the footage was disappointingly bland. They say a camera can capture emotion, that a director's lens has its own warmth. Under Ethan's direction, Megan always appeared untouchable, a serene, saintly figure. Her beauty was motionless, almost divine. In my previous life, I hadn't believed it. I told myself Ethan loved me and that Megan simply photographed better. But now I knew better. He loved her, and through his lens, she became untouchable, immortal. I could never compare. Why should all my efforts, all my sacrifices, still lose to a love that was so intangible, so fleeting? After countless takes of the spear fighting sequence, I was utterly exhausted. Ethan finally said, "Let's call it a day. We'll reshoot tomorrow." After the crew dispersed, Ethan approached me, his brows knit tightly in confusion. "You're not satisfied, are you? We've already spent so much time on this scene." I shot to my feet, stepping toward him so quickly that my legs, weakened from overexertion, almost gave out. Ethan moved to steady me, but I slapped his hand away. "Ethan, far away is your film. This scene is the protagonist's defining moment. Ask yourself, are you satisfied with today's footage?" Ethan said nothing. His silence spoke volumes. I was too tired to argue further. As I left, I turned back and said, "If you can get the shot right, I won't mind if, for now, you see me as Megan." Ethan's face stiffened, and I leaned in to whisper, "Do you really think you've hidden it so well?" I don't know if my words got through to him that night or if it was Charles's return to the set, but the scene was finally filmed to perfection. It wasn't without cost. The grueling spear fighting sequences left me with severe arm strain, but the set waits for no one. I gritted my teeth and kept going. Then the wire rigging malfunctioned. I had no strength left to hold on to anything as I fell. In that split second, I saw Ethan. Without hesitation, he ran. Not to me, but to Megan. How could I not feel heartbroken? I had known Ethan for over 50 years, and he was the person I relied on most. But I was never his first choice. The ground rushed toward me. I instinctively raised my hands to protect my face. For an actor, the face is everything. Far away was my first step toward changing my life. I couldn't afford to lose this opportunity. I told myself I didn't care. But in the end, I was trapped by my own obsession. Everything went dark. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. Sitting beside me was Charles. His expression exhausted. He let out a long sigh of relief when he saw me open my eyes. After confirming I was all right, his voice rose sharply. "Claire, how many lives do you think you have? Didn't the stunt coordinator teach you? When you fall, protect the back of your head." I knew how reckless I'd been and offered him a sheepish smile. It only made him angrier. He pressed his lips together, exhaled deeply, and finally said, "Claire, nothing is more important than your life. Rest well. You will always be the lead actress in Far Away." It wasn't until evening that Ethan finally came to see me. The concern on his face wasn't fake, but I still wasn't his first priority. Once, I believed he saw Megan as nothing more than a sister, that it was only natural for a brother to dote on his sister. But now I knew better. The reason I had never brought up divorce before was our 50 years together. Even with his diary in front of me, I couldn't bring myself to believe it. 50 years. Tens of thousands of days and nights. This was the man I had shared my bed with. And yet, in a life or death moment, he had chosen to abandon me. For the first time, I truly gave up on him. A wave of delayed anger surged through me, almost drowning me. It had been so long since I felt anything this strongly. Thoughts I had buried deep inside rose like a storm, impossible to suppress. In his diary, He wrote, "Megan, I'm trying to love someone else. Claire is a good woman. Loving her would be the best outcome for all of us. But I failed. Love cannot be forced." Countless times, I questioned myself. Am I really so unworthy of love? 50 years of life. More than half a lifetime. Was there even one moment when his heart moved for me? But in the end, I didn't ask. Because it didn't matter anymore. It really didn't matter anymore. "Ethan, once filming for Far Away is done, let's get a divorce." Ethan's face filled with disbelief. He stepped forward and grabbed my hand. "Claire, I can explain." I struggled to pull my hand free. His touch reminded me of the absurdity of my life. The nurse walked in, frowning as she looked at Ethan. "Who are you?" to the patient. She fell and hit the back of her head, resulting in a concussion. If the impact had been any worse, you might not be seeing her here now. Only then did it seem to dawn on Ethan how serious my injury was. His voice stammered. "Claire, I didn't know." His regret and fear were evident, and he moved forward in a flurry to check my injuries. When he saw the bandages on my head, his expression twisted in heartache. For the next few days, Ethan stayed by my side constantly. No matter how cold or indifferent I was toward him, he refused to leave. Sometimes, when I looked at him, my thoughts wandered. In my previous life, I once had surgery. Ethan had canceled all his work to stay by my side, taking care of me for an entire year. Back then, I mistook it for love. But love cannot withstand comparison, especially when Megan was involved. I was always his second choice. After a week of resting in the hospital, I returned to the set of Far Away. The production schedule couldn't afford further delays. Ethan, burdened with guilt over my injury, stuck to me like a shadow after every scene he directed. He seemed to believe my mention of divorce had been nothing more than a moment of anger, something he could smooth over with a bit of coaxing. Megan, on the other hand, cast him several hesitant, longing glances. This time, however, he steeled himself and didn't respond. Ethan told me Megan was just his sister, someone he felt obliged to look after because of her frail health since childhood. He also said, "We're married now. You're my wife. I'll try to love you more." I thought back to the timeline in his diary. This was the point when he was trying to love me. But love cannot be forced. "Ethan, no matter how much effort you put into it." His gaze carried a flicker of struggle before softening into a faint smile. "Claire, I'll be good to you," he said. Since he was willing, I wasn't going to waste the opportunity. Having the great Ethan personally coach me in acting was something I couldn't pass up. After the makeup artist finished with me, the room emptied, leaving only Ethan and me. This scene depicted Athena choose moral decline, where she temporarily strayed from her virtuous path. It was a critical moment of transformation for the character. Ethan had insisted on perfection, charm without vulgarity, allure with dignity. I studied the woman in the mirror. The bold red lips, perfectly styled waves, and the form-fitting cheongsam accentuating her curves looked unfamiliar. My naturally sharp features and strong brow made this seductive appearance feel almost alien. Standing, I reached out to grab Ethan's tie, pulling him closer until we were mere inches apart. In a low, breathy voice near his ear, I whispered, "You say there's no end to suffering. Master, why not save me yourself?" As I spoke, my lips brushed against his cheek, our breaths tangling together. For a moment, his composure faltered, and a faint blush climbed from his ears. In my previous life, I had never acted this boldly in front of Ethan. I'd read somewhere that men with insecurities in that regard tend to be more sensitive, so I had always tiptoed around his pride, carefully maintaining his dignity. I denied my own desires, hoping for a spiritual connection instead. What a joke it all turned out to be. "Director Hayes, what do you think?" I asked, stepping back and letting go of his tie. I lit a cigarette as I sank into a chair, exhaling a thin plume of smoke. Through the haze, I met Ethan's shadowed gaze. After a pause, he said quietly, "Once Far Away is finished, we'll truly be together. I'll work hard to love you." How laughable it was that loving me had to be a matter of effort. But I didn't need such a pitiful handout of affection. Slowly exhaling another puff of smoke, I let the corners of my mouth curl into a faint, ironic smile. "But Director Hayes," I said, my tone light yet biting, I've changed my mind. A man who can't isn't good enough for me. Unfortunately, someone happened to be passing by outside the door at that exact moment. They heard my words and dashed off like their life depended on it. Even more unfortunate was the fact that the person was notorious for being a gossip. The rumor that Ethan Hayes was incapable spread through the film industry like wildfire. During the remainder of Far Away's production, the crew exchanged furtive glances whenever they thought no one was looking. Under the weight of Ethan's increasingly dark scowl, the film eventually wrapped up. After completing the post-production promotions, we were finally done. I handed Ethan the draft of our divorce agreement. With a sincere tone, I said, "Ethan, if you truly love Megan, then fight for her. Don't let another lifetime slip away. My final gift to you is your freedom." There had been moments when I hated him so deeply I wanted to kill him, especially when I first discovered the truth. But after 50 years together, our relationship had grown so complicated that it defied simple labels. In this marriage, aside from love and children, Ethan had given me the respect and care I deserved. Letting him go was also a way of letting myself go. Ethan simply stared at me, his expression a little dazed. I sighed. People always seem to do inexplicable things at the wrong time. Take care of yourself, Ethan. I left the divorce papers on the table and stood to leave the cafe. March wind still carried a chill, and the breeze felt biting as it swept past me. But strangely, I felt a sense of relief. For the first time, my future would be lived for myself. After Far Away wrapped, I spent some time traveling, distancing myself from the life of Athena Chu. Midway through my travels, Charles came to see me. He invited me to star in a film called Years of Bloom. The Way family's young heir had grown tired of producing and wanted to try his hand at directing. If my memory served me right, Years of Bloom was the film that earned Megan international recognition when it was submitted to a foreign film festival. I remembered it vividly. Under the flashing lights of cameras, Megan walked arm in arm with Ethan down the red carpet. The bitterness and envy I felt that day stayed with me for years. I accepted Charles's offer and headed into the desert to film. What I didn't anticipate was that the shoot would stretch on for 3 years. During that time, I cut off nearly all ties with the outside world and poured myself entirely into the film. The director of Years of Bloom was infamous in the industry for being difficult to work with. No one ever knew when his films would finish. At times, I genuinely thought this movie would never wrap. When I wasn't filming, I would find a quiet corner and cry in secret. One day, I found Charles with red-rimmed eyes. Before I knew it, the two of us were hugging each other, crying into each other's shoulders. When we had cried ourselves out, we lay back on the vast desert sands, staring up at the countless stars scattered across the sky. The universe was so immense, and humanity so small. Thinking about it like that, all my past struggles seemed to fade into insignificance. Charles always had a way of lifting my spirits. He'd compliment me constantly. How well I acted, how good I looked, how articulate I was. He'd even joke about how my unwashed hair had character. Despite repeatedly telling myself that I was fine, that Ethan's lack of love for me was his loss, I would still fall into moments of self-doubt. But over time, Charles's relentless praise began to chip away at my insecurities. Slowly, I started to believe that maybe I wasn't so bad after all. When Charles confessed his feelings to me, my heart raced. I thought, at the very least, I don't dislike him. I accepted his confession. The unfulfilled regrets of my past finally dissipated into the air. It turned out that time truly could heal all wounds. Pain, love, hatred. When Years of Bloom finally wrapped and I emerged from the desert, it felt like I had lived a lifetime in those 3 years. Oh, and one more thing. Far Away won a major domestic film award, and the judging committee exhausted all their resources trying to locate me. Ironically, my unavailability made me the only absent recipient in the history of the prestigious Juling Awards to win Best Actress, unintentionally creating buzz around my name. I heard that Ethan and Megan got married, but somehow, they divorced not long after. Megan came to see me. In just a few years, her face had grown noticeably weary, undoubtedly from raising her difficult child, Joey. I figured she had finally experienced the struggles firsthand. In this tangled triangle of relationships, Megan always seemed like an outsider. She never asked for anything, simply letting Ethan plan everything for her unilaterally. In the end, All she did was stand at Ethan's grave, crying as she whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't know you loved me." But didn't she? After all those days and nights they spent together, how could she not know? I dropped 2 sugar cubes into my cup, watching them dissolve. Suddenly, I asked her, "Did you love Ethan?" Megan froze, staring down at the spoon in her hand. Her voice carried a tinge of sadness. How could I not love him? Then, with a sudden smile, she added, "But Claire, I'm not like you. I love myself more." After she left, I sat alone in the cafe for a long time. It wasn't until I saw Charles running through the rain toward me, his smile banishing the dreary gloom, that I felt a sense of clarity. In the end, Megan was simply a selfish person. Maybe she did love Ethan, but she loved herself more. That was why she could comfortably enjoy Ethan's devotion all those years while pretending to be oblivious. I had no intention of judging what was right or wrong because none of it mattered anymore. The day I moved my belongings out of the house, Ethan stood there, his eyes red and swollen as he clung to my suitcase, like a child who thought holding onto something tightly enough would keep it from leaving. He couldn't let go. I sighed and looked at him. "Ethan, let's go somewhere." Think of it as a way to end things properly. The place I took him to was a Taoist temple on Mount Sanqing. In my previous life, I had always wanted to visit it with him to fulfill a vow, but we never made it. Shrouded in mist, we walked silently up the mossy stone steps. "Ethan," I said, breaking the silence, "did you know there are 99 steps here?" Once, I climbed them, bowing at every 3rd step. Ethan looked puzzled, but I continued. "That was when you were overseas filming and encountered those bandits. I didn't know whether you were alive or dead. I was powerless, so I could only turn to the gods." His expression grew increasingly complicated, and he seemed like he wanted to say something, but all he could manage was a soft, "Claire." "Ethan, your feelings for me are like those of a child's attachment to a lost toy. First, you can't bear to part with it, but soon enough, you forget all about it." I climbed a few more steps, pausing before adding, "These are things I could never bring myself to say before. Admitting that someone doesn't love you is a blow to anyone's pride. But now, I've let it all go." Ethan suddenly stepped forward and grabbed my hand. "Claire, that's not true. You're wrong. What you're saying is just an assumption." I smiled faintly. "Ethan, if I hadn't asked for a divorce, if everything had gone the way you imagined, us staying together for the rest of our lives, would you have loved me?" He was silent for a long time, his expression pained. When he finally spoke, it was more to himself than to me, his voice trembling. "No, Claire, I do love you. I'll realize that I love you." By the time we reached the summit, we encountered a Taoist priest who stopped us and offered to read our fortunes for free. He looked at me, narrowing his eyes with an air of mystery. "Mississippi, you've come from far away, haven't you?" I smiled but didn't reply. These wandering fortune tellers always like to spout vague, mystical lines. The man lightly shook the bell in his hand, the sound carrying as though from a distant place. Ethan and I stood at the center of what felt like a swirling vortex, the weight of the future rushing toward us. From Ethan's perspective, it seemed as though he was waking from a long, endless dream. In this dream, he and I spent our lives together, growing old side by side, supporting each other through everything. He saw the day his diary was exposed, the way I stood dazed and helpless, surrounded by a crowd. He felt a dull ache in his heart, and he tried to push through the throng to reach me, wanting to shout, "It's not true." But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't break through. He saw me bowing at every 3rd step of the 99 steps, praying for his safe return when he was trapped overseas. He saw us as a family of 3, walking hand in hand across a sunlit lawn. In those moments, his happiness felt tangible, real. But that reality, so vivid, made him question. Ethan was a filmmaker, and films are constructed stories, fictional narratives. And so, he began to construct a dream for himself, a dream of far away. It wasn't that he had never felt anything for Megan, but his feelings for her were little more than the fleeting stirrings of youth. Yet the unattainable always seemed more precious. Over time, his fantasies turned that fleeting affection into something far deeper, overshadowing everything else. He lost sight of what was right in front of him, When the dream finally shattered, it felt like waking into a world he no longer recognized. In this waking world, 25-year-old Claire stood before him, her head bowed, chanting prayers. But the person she sought to protect and pray for was no longer him. The next time he saw Claire was at an awards ceremony, surrounded by admirers. She descended gracefully from the stage. Her gaze didn't linger on him. There was no need. She was the very embodiment of light itself. But when she looked at the man beside her, her lips curved into a gentle smile, and she took his arm. That's how it should have been all along. Her brilliance, her joy. His misplaced love had blinded him. Ethan bitterly downed the glass of wine in his hand and walked into the night. He could have spent his life in happiness, but in the end, he destroyed it all himself. From then on, the long road of life would be his to walk alone. The first story has concluded. We invite you to listen to the second story. When I performed at the Golden Hall in Vienna, I revealed the bullying I had endured at Emily High School. Armed with irrefutable evidence, I thought I would finally receive the long overdue justice I deserved. But to my utter horror, my husband, Adam, slit my throat in front of everyone. His eyes were bloodshot as he roared at me. Do you know that Emily suffered from depression? His face was still the refined, gentle one I had loved most. Yet now it twisted into the likeness of a vengeful demon. It was as if he couldn't wait to tear me apart piece by piece. Emily is dead. And it's all your fault, he screamed. Why couldn't you just let it go after all these years? Why did you have to bring it up again and kill her? Was exposing the truth about Emily's bullying really such an unforgivable crime? Had enduring years of torment and pain, simply to seek justice for myself, made me the villain? His expression was terrifying, a look I had never seen before. He was completely unhinged, saliva flying onto my face as he bellowed. Emily was such a kind person. She lived in guilt for 20 years over what happened in high school. She even gave me up to you because of it. Do you know what a good person she was? You only suffered 3 years of bullying. She just wanted you to suffer a little, not ruin your life. You endured for 3 years. And that proves Emily did nothing wrong. How dare you expose her bullying in public? Don't you know she couldn't handle the shame and ended up committing suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning? You're a murderer. Give Emily her life back. I struggled to lift my head, my lips trembling as I tried to speak, but I had no strength left. I could only watch as he kicked me to the ground and stabbed me again and again in a frenzy, turning me into a human sieve. Blood pooled beneath my motionless body like blooming snowflakes. Adam hunched over, looking like a feral beast ready to pounce. His hatred so intense he seemed determined to grind me into blood and dust. That moment, I finally understood. For 20 years, I had never truly existed in his heart. All he cared about was Emily, the same Emily who had bullied me for 3 years in high school, beaten me half to death, and nearly destroyed my hand, knowing full well I was a violinist. Listen to what he's saying. Does any of it make sense? I survived those 3 years of hell, clinging to the hope of one day exposing the truth and getting justice. Was it wrong to do so because the bullying didn't kill me? Does surviving mean the bullying wasn't a crime? Just because Adam married me, does that erase the damage and make everything even? And what compensation? He never told me anything about this so-called atonement for Emily. How was I supposed to know that giving up a man cost her nothing and was somehow meant to repay me? I gave you a man. Shouldn't that settle the score? I married you to atone for her sins. Shouldn't you accept that and kneel in gratitude? Since when does forgiveness not require the victim's consent? What does Emily's suicide have to do with me? Bullying is innocent, but exposing it is a crime? Where in the world does that make any sense? I was unwilling to accept this. I had just begun realizing my dream of a world tour, and this was only the first performance. Why did my life have to end because of this deranged couple? Why, as a victim, did I have to endure such a nightmare? In the final moments of my life, all I heard was the sound of a gunshot. The SWAT team shot Adam in the head as he was still stabbing me. How unfair. If there's a next life, I'll make Adam taste the small bit of suffering he so casually spoke of. I'll make sure he knows what it feels like to wish for death over life. As it turns out, fate is fair. It wasn't until the teacher shouted at me to get out of the classroom and stand in the hallway that I realized I had truly returned to high school. The sweltering summer heat, the stuffy classroom, the clattering of the ceiling fan spinning above, the drowsy students in the back row, and the restless cicadas chirping outside the curtains. All of it was so different from the modernized classrooms of 20 years later. I pinched my arm hard, and the sharp pain spreading from my arm to my brain confirmed it. This wasn't a dream. I had actually returned to high school. Before I could process it, an impatient shout came from inside the classroom. "Lynn Taylor, if you're not going to behave while standing in the hallway, then go home." The room erupted into laughter. The loudest laugh came from Emily Carter, who sat casually at a desk in the middle row, blatantly playing with her phone. So brazen. Yet not a single teacher dared to discipline her. There was only one person in the class who didn't laugh. He gave me a brief, indifferent glance, then returned his gaze to the podium. It was Adam Green. I would recognize that face even if it turned to ash. The lingering pain in my body seemed to resurface the moment he looked at me. My whole body trembled with rage as I lowered my head, clenching my fists so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. The sting amplified by the sweat on my skin. "Adam Green, you truly deserve to die, compared to those who mocked me outright." His silence felt like a veil of false kindness, but that was nothing more than my naive interpretation back in high school. There's a saying, if you see a bully tormenting someone and don't intervene, whether you feign neutrality or coldly watch from the sidelines, you're still helping the bully. The only difference is that bystander apathy comes without a moral burden. The fact that Adam could fall in love with Emily Carter only proved that he was a bully. 2. Closing my eyes, I recalled his words when he killed me. "Emily just wanted you to suffer a little. She never wanted you dead." Oh, how light his words were. Let him experience it himself and see if he can still speak so callously. Emily bullied me simply because Adam and I had once performed together as freshman representatives at the school auditorium. He played the piano while I played the violin. That single duet sparked rumors among our rowdy classmates, calling us a perfect match. Just one careless comment was enough to ignite Emily's fury. I still remember the first time she bullied me. She pressed a scorching curling iron against my arm, leaving twisted scars that never fully healed. She wielded it as though she wished she could stab it into my eye. "Lynn Taylor, you're just some broke nobody trying to seduce our top student. Look at yourself. Do you think you're worthy?" She sneered. "Your family is so poor they work for others. Yet here you are pretending to be classy, playing the violin. What? Hoping to marry a rich guy like Adam Green and live the high life." The curling iron seared into my neck, leaving a scar so deep I would wear turtlenecks for the rest of my life. Now, I was about to relive the first moment of her bullying. As soon as school ended, Emily and her lackeys dragged me into an abandoned auditorium where no one would pass by. "Bitch." Those were Emily's first words to me after 20 years. She slapped me hard across the face, her hand swinging with such force that it stung even after all this time. As she shook her hand off, a smile played at her lips, innocent yet cruel, a chilling contradiction. "You've got some nerve," Emily Carter sneered, her voice dripping with malice. "Flirting with Adam Green behind my back? Think you can grab his attention by acting out in class? Even after being sent to the hallway, you still don't behave." With a sharp slap, she struck my face again. The force sent me stumbling back several steps until one of her lackeys kicked the back of my knees, forcing me to kneel on the ground. Emily yanked my hair so hard her manicured nails dug painfully into my scalp. "Adam looked at you today, didn't he? Feeling smug about it?" she hissed. A wave of dizziness overwhelmed me. It took a long moment for my vision to stabilize and the blurred figures around me to merge into Emily's face. My mind raced back to this exact day in my past life, recalling the events that followed. Even 20 years later, in my previous life, the memories haunted me, a nightmare I could never escape. Yet to Adam, all of this was just a trivial remark. Emily just wanted you to suffer a little, not kill you. If these nightmares were nothing to him, then perhaps he should experience them himself. I raised my head slowly, ignoring the stinging pain on my cheek. "Adam told me he has a crush on you," I said, my voice steady despite the throbbing ache. "He told me to stay away from him to avoid any gossip about the two of you." Emily froze, momentarily stunned by my words. Even her hand, poised to grab a curling iron, hesitated. "What did you just say?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I could tell she was agitated. Emily was fiercely proud and couldn't stand anyone outshining her. Back during our freshman performance, the idea that I could share a spotlight with Adam had already infuriated her. Had it not been for her being voted school beauty by a landslide, my suffering might have started even earlier. Now, I had dropped a bombshell. News that the man she had her eye on might actually harbor feelings for her. The satisfaction of conquering such a perceived rival would undoubtedly consume her. Her grip on my collar tightened as she demanded, "Say that again. Repeat what you just said." I exhaled deeply and raised my voice. "Adam told me he has feelings for you. He said he's interested but didn't want to approach you because our classmates keep linking his name with mine. He's worried about causing trouble for you. I think if you confess to him boldly, he'd cave in no time. After all, everyone says a woman pursuing a man is like crossing a thin veil." A faint blush flashed across Emily's face before she quickly masked it with a smug expression. She released me with a satisfied huff, her lips curling into a triumphant smile. Since he told you that, you'd better behave from now on and stop hovering around him. Got it?" I nodded weakly. Emily's mood seemed to lift as she hummed a tune, signaling for her lackeys to follow her out. They left me alone, trembling on the floor, blood trickling from my lips as I forced a smile. With Emily's arrogance and impulsive nature, I was sure she wouldn't wait long. By the next day, she'd make a bold, public confession to Adam, but Adam, valuing his pride, would never accept. And when Emily's ego was bruised, she'd undoubtedly lash out to reclaim her dignity. They were a perfect pair, selfish and egotistical to the core. Watching them tear each other apart would be satisfying. As expected, the very next morning during the school's break period, before the teacher entered the classroom, Emily Carter and her lackeys had already surrounded Adam Green. Emily, wearing her school uniform modified to accentuate curves far beyond what was typical for her age, lifted her chin high with pride. "Adam, I know you've had a crush on me for a long time," she began confidently. "You just didn't want to cause me trouble with all the gossip going around school." She paused, then casually perched herself on the edge of Adam's desk. Her thigh-high stockings pressed into her pale skin, creating a soft curve that carried an air of deliberate seduction. "You should have told me earlier," she continued. "I don't care about what people say. As long as you nod now, you'll be my boyfriend from this moment on. I'll take care of you." Adam, however, acted as if he were blind. Even with her legs blatantly in his line of sight, he kept his head down, focused on his homework as if she weren't even there. Emily's smile began to falter. Embarrassed, she slammed her manicured hand down on his test paper, the diamonds on her nails tearing for jagged lines into the sheet. Finally, Adam looked up at her, his gaze calm and unyielding. "When did I ever say I liked you?" he said, his voice cold. "You're disturbing my studies." He paused for a moment, then added, "Coming out of nowhere and saying I have a crush on you. Has anyone ever told you how self-centered you are?" Emily hadn't expected such a blunt rejection. Her practiced, flirtatious smile froze awkwardly on her face. Meanwhile, I buried my face in my arms, biting my sleeve to stifle the laugh that threatened to escape. Adam was as proud as a stubborn rock in a filthy bathroom, unyielding and arrogant. Back then, when he pursued me, I thought it was because of our shared experiences of hardship, a bond forged from mutual understanding. Now, I knew better. His so-called affection for me had been nothing more than an effort to atone for Emily. Adam's family had once been wealthy, but his father's gambling addiction had squandered everything. After losing their fortune, his father became an alcoholic and died in a car crash, leaving nothing but wreckage. His mother, unable to bear the stress, passed away not long after, though Adam was left with nothing. He clung fiercely to his pride, refusing donations and instead working 10 times harder to earn the top spot in school and sustain himself with scholarships. In many ways, his fall from grace mirrored my own family's downfall. My parents had been ruined by deceitful business partners, leaving us heavily in debt. Back then, I thought Adam and I were seeking solace in each other, but now I realized I had been fooling myself. This proud young man could only maintain his dignity through his arrogance. Naturally, he found Emily's ostentatious flaunting of her wealth and power utterly repulsive. Still, his disdain for her was tempered by the undeniable beauty of her face. The tension between them was palpable, like the sharp clash of a needle against a grain of wheat. All that was needed was a spark to ignite the fire, and I was more than willing to provide it. Lowering my voice, I murmured from within the crowd, "No way. Is the top student actually shy? We all heard you tell Lynn to keep her distance from you because you didn't want her getting the wrong idea. You said you already like someone else, didn't you?" I raised my voice slightly, making sure my words carried. "You, of all people, having a crush? The only person you'd be interested in has to be the school beauty, right? Don't hold back. Just admit it. Be together. Be together." My instigation took root immediately. In the group mentality of high school, especially among those who feared offending Emily, my chant quickly spread. Soon, the entire crowd was shouting, "Be together. Be together." Adam, now the center of attention, was visibly uncomfortable. Emily, on the other hand, seemed quite pleased with the crowd's reaction. Her head tilted proudly, her chin lifted like a princess basking in admiration. Emily Carter repeated herself, declaring once more that Adam Green should be her boyfriend, as though dating her was some kind of divine blessing. Adam's face turned pale. His gaze swept around the room as if searching for something. Or someone. I guess he was likely looking for me, the unlucky scapegoat who had once been paired with him by rumors. Maybe he wanted to use me as an escape tool from this mess. But he wouldn't find me. I was hidden in the deepest corner of the crowd, far out of sight. After scanning the room in vain, Adam bit his lower lip, his neck stiff as he stood his ground. "I'm not interested in you," he said firmly. "Stop deluding yourself. A student's primary focus should be on studying." Now it was Emily's turn to feel humiliated. Her face flushed green with anger, and I even caught a cold laugh escaping her lips. I could already predict what awaited Adam. The familiar small auditorium, the familiar sound of slaps and shouts. It was all playing out in my mind like a haunting memory. From afar, I could almost hear Emily's shrill voice echoing in the space. "Adam Green, who do you think you are? I was willing to make you my boyfriend out of the goodness of my heart. And this is how you repay me. I throw you a little kindness, and you dare to act like you can paint the whole canvas with it. Just like in my previous life." She grabbed his face with one hand, slapping him hard across the cheek without hesitation. The crisp sound of the strike reverberated through the space. "You're just a broke nobody pretending to be some kind of young master," she sneered. "How dare you give me attitude? Do you even know your place?" Adam's eyes filled with disbelief. He seemed stunned that the Emily he knew, the one who still maintained some semblance of humanity in public, had transformed so quickly into a vicious demon. It was especially evident when Emily grabbed a scorching curling iron, freshly heated after styling her hair, and pressed it against Adam's arm. His muffled screams barely escaped his mouth before a pair of dirty socks were shoved in to silence him. I could see faint wisps of white smoke rising, accompanied by the acrid smell of burning flesh. The smell seeped through the cracks in the window, tickling my nose, and I couldn't help but feel an unexpected satisfaction. Sweat dripped down Adam's forehead, and his complexion grew paler with each passing moment. Despite his evident pain, Emily's angelic face twisted into a devilish smirk. "Do you give in now, Adam?" she taunted, lifting his chin with the tip of her shoe. "Kiss my foot, and maybe I'll let you off this time." Adam remained silent. His head hung low. I didn't need to see his face to know that he was clenching his teeth so hard he might shatter them. The more defiant he acted, the more it fueled Emily's predatory instincts. Her hunger for dominance only intensified. Seeing Adam as a prize worth conquering, the thrill of breaking him, of asserting her power, sent waves of euphoria through her. Adam had never seen this side of Emily before. In his eyes, she had always been the fragile, remorseful girl haunted by her past mistakes, a victim of her own immaturity during high school. In Adam's eyes, Emily was someone who had been kind and pure, a misunderstood soul whose guilt over her high school wrongdoings had led her to a tragic end. He blamed me for exposing her actions, which he believed had driven her to suicide. How laughable. If Emily had truly repented, she would have apologized to me, sincerely, even once, over the past 20 years. Now, it was Adam's turn to face the unmasked Emily. Stripped of her facade, it was time for him to experience her true colors firsthand. I turned to leave but caught a glimpse of Adam Green's gaze suddenly shifting toward me out of the corner of my eye. He had seen me. Adam really had seen me. The next day, he showed up in long sleeves, looking utterly exhausted. He avoided eye contact, his eyes darting nervously, his movements hesitant. After glancing back multiple times, he finally slipped me a note when collecting homework. The note contained a time and place. He wanted to meet me privately at the music hall where we had once performed together. The crumpled paper, slightly damp and shaky in its handwriting, betrayed his fear. It seemed that after I left yesterday, Emily Carter hadn't stopped with just his arm. She had gone further. The entire day, Adam kept sneaking glances at me. His gaze carried a mix of curiosity, pleading, and, above all, hope. I could guess what he wanted. He hoped I would be a witness, someone to expose Emily's crimes. At the very least, he wanted to drag me into this mess with him, to sway me. He'd even chosen the music hall, likely hoping the memory of our duet would stir some sentimental feelings and prompt me to act on his behalf. If I were still an oblivious high schooler, I might have fallen into this trap. What a despicable person. In my past life, I endured 3 years of bullying while he turned a blind eye. Now that it was his turn to suffer, he was suddenly in a hurry to act. No need to rush. Adam, your reckoning has only just begun. I deliberately turned back to look at him, giving him a slight nod. Adam's eyes lit up instantly, brimming with excitement. In that moment, his charming almond-shaped eyes sparkled with a hint of ambiguous emotion. Let him stare a little longer. The more he hopes, the harder his fall will be. When the appointed time came, I arrived as promised. The moment I opened the doors to the music hall, a beam of light streamed in, landing directly on Adam's face. The sunlight cast a sheer, ethereal glow over him, accentuating the sickly pallor of his complexion. For a fleeting moment, he looked like someone who might collapse any second. Perhaps Emily hadn't gone far enough. Otherwise, how did he still have the strength to put on such a performance in front of me? Adam's face lit up with a hint of delight as he saw me. "Lynn, you came," he said, his smile measured to perfection, as though crafted to make others feel at ease. Such theatrics. Why wasn't he in showbiz? I nodded. "What do you need from me?" "Adam." He jumped down from the stage, clearly attempting to maintain an air of elegance. Unfortunately, his current physical state wasn't up to the task, and he nearly face-planted. I stood to the side, watching his clumsy recovery with a mix of amusement and disdain. If only Emily had been a little more ruthless, maybe she would have finished him off. What a poetic ending that would have been. An unworthy man meeting his end at the hands of the woman he supported. Adam stumbled for a moment, glancing at me with an embarrassed look when he realized I had no intention of helping him. Propping himself up on the armrest of a nearby seat, he managed to stand, though not without difficulty. His face flushed briefly before he turned to me with a pleading expression. "Lynn, you know the truth," he began. I was beaten by Emily Carter." Adam Green stammered. "I know you saw it. You're the kindest, most righteous girl in school. You would never let something as heinous as campus violence happen to a fellow student, right? Lynn, you'll help me, won't you?" He looked as though he had suffered the greatest humiliation imaginable, right in front of me. He began unbuttoning his shirt one button at a time, revealing the crisscross scars on his skin, marks left by kicks, punches, and burns under his long-sleeved shirt. If I were still a naive high school girl, I might have been overcome with righteous indignation and agreed to testify for him without a second thought. But unfortunately for Adam, I'm not that foolish. If I had agreed, Emily Carter would have immediately turned her wrath on me. With her family's power and influence, it would be all too easy for her to sweep this matter under the rug and silence Adam with a bribe. Adam would take the money and disappear, leaving me to bear the brunt of her fury. He had endured the rain, and now he wanted to rip apart my umbrella to shield himself. The thought made me sick. How could I have ever been attracted to someone like him in my past life? I stood there expressionless, staring at Adam without blinking. I kept my gaze fixed on him until he squirmed under the scrutiny, instinctively shrinking back. Only then did I let out a soft chuckle. "Wow, Adam, I never would have thought you'd get into fights after school. You're saying Emily Carter beat you?" Do you think I'm blind? I continued, my tone light and casual, even as I wove blatant lies. Emily likes you so much it's practically written all over her face. She's been openly chasing you at school. Anyone with eyes can see it. Don't slander her like that. Okay. You probably got into a fight with someone else and ended up like this. How can you throw mud on a girl's name like that? As I spoke, my face remained calm, my voice steady, not betraying the slightest flicker of guilt. I lifted my eyes to meet Adam's, watching his expression twist into one of utter disbelief. He looked at me as though he couldn't comprehend how I could lack even a shred of sympathy for him. Once, I had harbored a faint admiration for Adam. On stage, during our duet, the atmosphere had been just right. For a young girl, it was easy to mistake such fleeting moments for genuine affection. But that faint admiration had long since been obliterated, shattered to dust by the countless stabs and betrayals in my past life. Now, I only wanted to see Adam and Emily destroyed together, with nothing left of them. When Adam reached out to grab my sleeve, I coldly shook him off. My voice, now tinged with frost, cut through the air. Adam, have some self-respect. Don't tarnish a girl's reputation just because you're in trouble. And don't drag me into your mess. Take care of your own problems. Adam's desperation flared as he shouted, you and everyone else have been fooled by that little witch Emily Carter. She doesn't like me at all. She's just using me as a plaything. They beat me, insult me, and even tried to ruin my hands so I can't play piano anymore. I swear, every word I'm saying is true. I swear to God. Swearing to God? I smirked inwardly. If men could be trusted, pigs would fly. I had been waiting for this. Without hesitation, I slapped Adam hard across the face. The crisp sound echoed in the empty hall. Stop dragging girls down just to save yourself. I said sharply. Even if you have issues with Emily, she's still your classmate. We all have to see each other every day. Don't make things worse for everyone. Adam stared at me, stunned, as though I had grown horns. You were bullied by Emily too. How can you defend her? So he knew. He had always known. Even in this lifetime, he was fully aware of everything. I had been bullied by Emily Carter because of Adam Green. Yet, he acted as if it didn't matter. Now that it was happening to him, he was suddenly panicked. I mimicked his past indifference and actions. And now he was the one feeling the urgency. How ridiculous. If the knife doesn't cut into your own flesh, you'll never know the pain. I shook off his hand forcefully and called out toward the door. Emily Carter. Emily Carter. Adam's eyes widened in alarm. Who are you calling? Who else? Of course. But Emily. I replied with a smile. Emily strutted into the small auditorium, her lackeys trailing behind her, a cigarette dangling from her lips. She sneered as she approached. Emily had no love for me either. She spat in my face and barked. Drop that servile act. You little toady. It makes me sick. Without any reason, she slapped me hard across the face. Just looking at your pathetic, innocent face pisses me off, she said coldly. At least this time you were smart enough to come tell me. I lowered my head, staying silent. Like a frightened quail, I shrank into myself, letting her vent her frustrations. To her, bullying someone as timid as me was meaningless. She ordered her lackeys to kick me out of the auditorium, leaving me curled on the floor and trembling. Emily smirked as she pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. Adam Green, you've got some nerve. Didn't you agree to be my dog yesterday? And now you're sneaking around behind my back. I didn't dare lift my head, but the sound of his cries told me exactly what was happening. The lackeys kicked me like a soccer ball, sending me rolling out of the auditorium. Get out, you spineless coward. One of them sneered, their laughter laced with cruelty. If you stick around and piss us off again, you'll regret it. Feigning fear, I nodded quickly and added in a trembling voice. I think I saw someone coming this way just now. If anyone. One of the lackeys frowned. Don't worry about it. We have the key. Just keep your mouth shut. Once I was out, they locked the door from the inside. I made sure they didn't notice as I slipped a crowbar onto the handle, jamming it shut from the outside. The dark auditorium reeked of something sharp and acrid. Gasoline. It was the same gasoline Emily had used to threaten me in my past life. During that terrifying moment when she took humiliating photos of me, and threatened to burn me alive. Now it was their turn to feel the fear. I removed my jacket and placed it in the most flammable spot in the room. The student name tag sewn onto it bore the unmistakable name, Adam Green. A small flame ignited with a faint crackle. The fire quickly spread along the trail of gasoline, weaving through the room like a spider's web. The auditorium, rarely used except for monthly maintenance, was now engulfed. The next scheduled maintenance was still weeks away. And thanks to Emily's paranoia, the window locks had been sealed to prevent any of her victims from escaping during her usual bullying sessions. The fire spread rapidly. Through the glass windows, I could see Emily and her group beginning to panic. "What's going on?" one of them shouted, their voices muffled but frantic. "How did it catch fire? Open the door. Quick." Faced with a life-threatening situation, Emily Carter no longer cared about beating Adam Green. She frantically pulled her lackeys toward the main door, abandoning Adam, who lay sprawled on the ground, stripped of his dignity and gasping like a dying dog. Reaching the door, one of the lackeys yelped as the scalding hot handle burned his hand. He recoiled in pain, unwilling to touch it again. Emily, irritated, grabbed his hand and forced it back onto the lock. "What are you acting all delicate for? It's just a little heat. If you don't open this door now, we're all going to die in here." The lackey screamed as blisters formed on his palms, and when the lock fell to the ground, it landed squarely on his foot, prompting another howl of pain. Emily slapped him across the face. "Shut up. Do you think screaming will help us get out?" Humiliated but helpless, the lackey trailed behind her, trying to assist in breaking the door down. Emily kicked it hard, and the door cracked open slightly, a thin, finger-width gap. But no matter how hard they tried, it wouldn't budge any further. "What's going on? Why won't it open?" Of course, it wouldn't open. I had locked it from the outside. As Emily finally began to panic, I remained calm and collected. Slowly, I strolled over, sucking on a lollipop, and peered at her through the narrow gap in the door. The moment she saw me, Emily's eyes filled with rage. She screamed, "You bitch! What are you standing there for? Open this door right now." I acted as though I hadn't heard her, idly cleaning my ears in plain view of her furious face. Emily's frustration boiled over. "You just wait. When I get out of here, I'm going to kill you." I smiled lightly. "Is that how you ask for help? You've got the wrong attitude. Emily. Oh, and by the way, you're not getting out of here." As her expression twisted with fury, I grabbed her hand, which had reached through the gap in an attempt to move the crowbar blocking the door. I pressed her hand against the burning hot door handle, and she screamed in pain, shouting more threats at me. "Does it hurt?" I asked mockingly, watching her face go pale. Then, I poured gasoline right through the gap, splashing it onto her face and clothes. What are you doing to me?" she shrieked. "Gasoline," I replied calmly, pouring more onto the door and the frame. "Surely you can smell it, right?" Emily cursed at me, stumbling backward. "Get that bastard Adam to grab the crowbar. If he doesn't, we're all going to die." Her lackeys grabbed Adam and forced him toward the door, shoving his hand toward the crowbar. But before he could move it, I dumped gasoline onto his arm and tossed a lighter through the gap. The flame ignited instantly, engulfing Adam's prized piano playing hand in fire. His screams filled the auditorium, raw and guttural, as he flailed in agony. "Useless," Emily shouted, furious. "You can't even move a crowbar. Hurry up and get it out of the way." Ignoring Adam's suffering, she pressed him closer to the door, desperate to escape. But she failed to notice that the flames from the gasoline outside were already creeping toward the interior. The fire spread quickly, climbing up Adam's body. His screams grew louder, but Emily didn't stop. She only cared about saving herself, even if it meant stepping over the burning corpses of everyone else. In Emily Carter's world, those beneath her were nothing but stepping stones. But she forgot one crucial thing. Even a cornered rat will bite. As the flames consumed him, Adam's eyes filled with something new. Hatred. Absolute, unrelenting hatred. Adam Green, engulfed in flames, threw himself at Emily Carter, his burning body igniting the gasoline on her face and clothes. In that moment, Emily let out the first truly guttural, piercing scream of her life. The kind of scream that only comes from someone experiencing unbearable pain for the first time. It hurts. It hurts so much, she wailed. So even the lofty, untouchable princess feared death and pain after all. Her lackeys, frozen in terror, screamed and shouted, but they didn't forget to hurl threats at me. You'd better call the fire department. If you don't, you're just standing by and letting us die. I smiled even more brightly. The security cameras were already broken by Emily. What evidence is there to prove I was ever here? I took a few steps back, savoring the scene. Enjoy the grand finale of your lives, I said softly. The flames roared, consuming everything in their path. It wasn't just the physical building that burned. It was as if the fire was purging the hidden sins of the school itself. By the time school officials discovered the fire and called the fire department, the auditorium had already been reduced to charred rubble. Emily's 4 lackeys had all died from excessive smoke inhalation, while Adam Green suffered the worst fate. He was burned alive. His death gruesome. 10 fingers, 4 of them bitten off, fractured leg bones, broken ribs. His injuries suggested unimaginable torment before he succumbed, but no one cared about his death. He was just an orphan, a boy whose once prosperous family had fallen to ruin. His death rippled across the community like a drop in a vast lake, causing only minor waves that quickly disappeared. Within a few days, everything returned to calm. Unexpectedly, Emily Carter survived, severely burned and disfigured. She lost an eye and was left in a vegetative state. Her family was furious and sought to hold the school accountable, but all evidence pointed to Emily being the aggressor who had sought out Adam. Witnesses, some unafraid of the Carter family's power, revealed that Emily had been obsessively pursuing Adam, and this chain of events had unraveled her history of bullying. The Carter family, fearing further exposure, chose to retreat quietly, applying pressure only in private. But in the end, the official conclusion labeled the incident as a result of Emily's history of bullying Adam, who had retaliated in anger. The Carters had many grievances but little recourse. I wrote an anonymous report. In my past life, the reason Emily's bullying stopped after 3 years was because a government inspection team uncovered corruption among the Carter family's protectors. The anti-corruption campaign took down some powerful figures, leaving the Carter family without their protective umbrella. Forced to act more discreetly, they laid low after that. In this life, I knew exactly what to do. The moment I was reborn, I began collecting evidence. I found newspaper reports from my past life that detailed corrupt practices tied to the Carters and secretly compiled the information into an anonymous tip. Then, I took leave from school and traveled to another province to report it in person. There's a saying, "It doesn't matter how you treat me. What matters is that you're no longer in my way." The position beneath a big tiger, a metaphor for those in power, was coveted by many. When someone delivers a target on a silver platter, as long as the initial investigation checks out, there's little chance the matter will be ignored. When the Carter family tried to pursue further action, their protective umbrella had already fallen. The powerful figures shielding them had been taken down, leaving the Carters seething with frustration. All they could do was ensure that Emily Carter, now a vegetative shell of her former self, remained alive in the hospital. With Emily gone and Adam Green out of the picture, my life became much smoother. Relying on the knowledge from my past life, I chose to major in information technology in college. After graduating from a prestigious university, I boldly joined a small startup that was little more than a factory at the time. As their 9th employee, I received original shares and grew alongside the company, which soon evolved into a tech giant. Within 10 years of graduation, my assets had reached staggering heights, and it had only been 17 years since that fire. When I decided to step down as CFO of the company and transition into life as an angel investor, ready to enjoy the rest of my days, I received news. Emily Carter had woken up. Out of curiosity, I made a special trip to see her. The person staring back at Emily from the mirror was a grotesque shadow of her former self. Her hair was nearly all gone, her face marred by scars that twisted her features into something almost inhuman. One eye was missing, and the empty socket on the other side had shrunk into a hollow pit. As she took in her reflection, Emily let out a blood-curdling scream and shattered the mirror in front of her. The sight left me in high spirits. That evening, I returned home and played my violin for hours to celebrate. The very next day, I received the news. Emily Carter had jumped from the hospital roof. She was dead. This time, there was no self-righteous atoning lover to avenge her. Let those two vile souls rot together in the underworld, bound in eternal misery. As for me, I only needed to enjoy the smooth, fulfilling life that was finally mine.